Imagine looking up at the night sky and seeing a massive glowing arc stretching from horizon to horizon. Not the moon, not the stars, but giant shimmering rings encircling our entire planet. Saturn's rings are one of the most beautiful sights in our solar system. But what if Earth had rings like Saturn? Would they be beautiful, or would they completely change life as we know it? Today, we're diving into this fascinating thought experiment. We'll explore what these rings would look like from different places on Earth, how they'd affect our climate, our history, and even our future. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never look at the sky the same way again. Let's get started. First, let's talk about what these rings would actually look like. Saturn's rings are made of billions of chunks of ice and rock, ranging from tiny grains to house-sized boulders. They stretch over 280,000 kilometers wide, but are incredibly thin. In some places, less than 10 meters thick. Think of them like a cosmic DVD floating around the planet. If Earth had similar rings, they would sit along our equator, because that's how planetary rings work. They form along the equatorial plane due to gravity and rotation. Now, here's where it gets interesting. What you'd see depends entirely on where you live. If you lived near the equator, in places like Singapore, Nairobi, or Quito, you'd see the rings edge on. They'd appear as a thin, bright line cutting straight across the sky from east to west. During the day, they'd look like a shimmering white line. At night, they'd glow softly, reflecting sunlight like a giant celestial highway. But if you lived at mid-latitudes, say in New York, London, or Tokyo, the view would be absolutely spectacular. The rings would arch across the sky in a massive curve. They'd be widest near the horizon and narrow as they rose overhead. Imagine a glowing rainbow that never fades, visible day and night. And if you lived near the North or South Pole, you'd see the rings flat on, like a giant disc hovering above the horizon. They'd look like a ghostly halo circling the edge of the world. No matter where you lived, the rings would be breathtaking. But they wouldn't just be pretty to look at, they'd change everything. Let's talk about shadows. Saturn's rings cast shadows on the planet, and Earth's rings would do the same thing. Depending on the time of year and where you are, those shadows could have a dramatic impact. During the equinoxes in March and September, when the sun is directly over the equator, the rings would cast a massive shadow along the equator. Countries near the equator would experience a phenomenon called ring shadow season. For several hours each day, a dark band would sweep across the Earth as the rings blocked the sun. This wouldn't be like a solar eclipse. It would happen every single day during these periods. Temperatures would drop, crops might be affected, and entire civilizations would have to adapt their agriculture and daily routines around this shadow. But here's the flip side. At night, the rings would reflect sunlight back to Earth. Even in the middle of the night, cities near the equator would have a soft twilight glow. You might not even need streetlights. The rings would act like a giant mirror in space. For people living farther from the equator, the effect would be less intense but still noticeable. You'd get beautiful ring-lit nights where the sky never gets fully dark. This would have completely changed human history. Ancient civilizations might have worshipped the rings as gods. Calendars would be based on ring shadow cycles. Navigation at sea would be easier because you'd always have a bright celestial landmark. Now let's get into climate. The rings would reflect some of the sun's energy back into space before it even reaches Earth. This is called the albedo effect. Depending on how thick and reflective the rings are, they could lower Earth's average temperature. Equatorial regions, which are normally the hottest parts of Earth, might actually be cooler because the rings block some sunlight. Meanwhile, polar regions wouldn't be affected as much. This could shift weather patterns entirely. The difference in temperature between the equator and the poles drives our jet streams, ocean currents, and storm systems. With cooler equatorial regions, hurricanes might be less frequent or less powerful. Monsoon patterns could change. Deserts might expand or shrink. Over millions of years, this could even affect ice ages. If the rings cooled the planet enough, ice sheets might spread farther from the poles. But here's something most people don't think about. The rings themselves wouldn't last forever. So where would Earth's rings even come from? Planetary rings form in a few ways. One possibility is that a moon got too close to Earth and crossed something called the Roche limit. This is the distance where tidal forces from Earth's gravity would literally rip the moon apart, turning it into a ring of debris. Another possibility is a massive asteroid impact. If a large asteroid smashed into one of Earth's moons, or even collided with Earth itself, the debris could spread out and form rings. Saturn's rings might have formed this way, and they're estimated to be only 100 to 400 million years old, relatively young in cosmic terms. If Earth had rings, they might have formed early in our planet's history, possibly from the same collision that created our moon 4.5 billion years ago. Some of that debris could have stayed in orbit and formed rings instead of clumping together. But here's the thing, rings don't last forever. Over time, particles in the rings collide, fall into the planet's atmosphere, or get pulled away by the moon's gravity. Earth's rings, if they existed, might only last a few 100 million years before disappearing. Now let's jump to the modern day. If Earth had rings, space travel would be a nightmare. Today we have thousands of satellites orbiting Earth, GPS satellites, weather satellites, communication satellites, the International Space Station. All of these would have to navigate around the rings. Launching rockets would be dangerous. You'd have to punch through a field of icy debris traveling at thousands of kilometers per hour. One collision could destroy a spacecraft instantly. And speaking of collisions, space junk would be even worse. Every time particles in the rings smashed into each other, they'd create more debris. This could lead to something called Kessler syndrome, where collisions cause a chain reaction, filling orbit with so much junk that space becomes unusable. Astronomy would also be affected. Ground-based telescopes would have a harder time seeing deep space because the rings would scatter light. We'd have to rely more on space telescopes positioned outside the ring system. On the flip side, the rings might protect us from some asteroid impacts. Small asteroids could get caught in the rings and break apart before hitting Earth, but larger ones would still get through. Let's imagine how rings would have shaped human culture. Ancient civilizations would have been obsessed with them. The Egyptians, Mayans, Greeks, they all studied the sky intensely. Rings would dominate their mythology, art, and architecture. Religions might form around the rings. Some cultures might see them as a bridge to the heavens. Others might fear them as a sign of divine judgment. Navigation would be revolutionized. Sailors could use the rings as a constant reference point. Explorers would map the world using ring positions. And in modern times, the rings would be on every flag, every logo, every piece of art. They'd be the most photographed thing on Earth. Tourism would boom in places with the best ring views. But there'd also be conflict. Countries along the equator might fight over ring rights. Who controls the view? Who gets to name them? So what if Earth had Saturn's rings? Life would be dramatically different. Our climate would change, our nights would glow, our history would be rewritten, and our future in space would face new challenges. But one thing's for sure, our planet would be even more beautiful than it already is. If you enjoyed imagining this cosmic what if, hit that like button and subscribe for more mind-bending space content. Drop a comment and tell me, would you want Earth to have rings, or are you happy with our ringless planet? Next time, we'll explore another incredible space mystery. Until then, keep looking up and imagine what could be.